Have you ever wondered what lies beyond this life? Have you ever wondered what lies beyond this life? What happens in that final moment when the heart stops, the world fades, and you cross over? Some say it's nothing, others say it's peace. But for Don Piper, a Baptist minister and father, death wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something divine. This is his true story, a story of pain, peace, purpose, and of coming face to face with the presence of God. It was a cold and rainy Wednesday morning, January 18th, 1989. Don Piper, then 38 years old, had just finished attending a ministers' conference in Texas. The meeting had gone well. He was energized, inspired, and spiritually renewed. He got into his red Ford Escort and began driving home, thinking about his family and his church back in Pasadena. There was nothing unusual about that morning until everything changed. As Don crossed a narrow bridge on a two-lane highway, an 18-wheeler trying to make up time in the rain lost control and swerved directly into his lane. With nowhere to go and no time to react, the truck slammed into Don's car head-on. The impact was instant, crushing. The scene was horrific. Don's small car was mangled, completely crushed. Emergency responders arrived quickly, but when they got to Don, there was no hope. He had no pulse, no breath, no signs of life. His body was twisted between the seats, his legs shattered, his chest impaled by the steering wheel. Paramedics covered him with a tarp and called the coroner. He was declared dead at the scene. Other survivors were being treated. Ambulances came and went. For the next 90 minutes, Don Piper's lifeless body sat in the wreck. No movement, no response. Time moved on. But Don wasn't entirely gone. Here's where the story defies explanation. Don says that during those 90 minutes, while his body lay crushed and still on earth, he experienced something so real, so vivid, so alive, that he struggled for years to describe it. He says he entered heaven. He didn't float. He didn't drift through clouds. It was as if he simply stepped from one realm into another. The first thing he noticed was the light, brighter than the sun, yet not blinding. It surrounded him, filled him, embraced him. There was no fear, no pain, only peace. He stood before a magnificent gate, not a gate of iron or stone, but of gold and pearl, alive with color and music, music unlike anything he'd heard before. So layered, so melodic, it seemed to come from every direction, even from within. And then he saw them, people, familiar faces, loved ones who had passed, his grandfather, a childhood friend, old church members. They were there to welcome him, smiling, radiant, whole. They didn't speak with words, but he understood everything. Their presence was joy. Their embrace was love. He was home. In the midst of this divine welcome, Don says he felt something even greater than the music, the colors, or the joy. He felt the presence. He doesn't describe it like a man on a throne or a booming voice from the sky. No, God's presence was everywhere. It was in everything, a holy, overwhelming reality. He was surrounded by love that had no beginning and no end, a love that knew him completely and held nothing against him, and he didn't want to leave. He writes in his book 90 Minutes in Heaven that not once did he think of earth, of pain, or even his own family. That's how all-consuming heaven was. There was no worry, no sorrow, only the completeness of being with God. But then, just as quickly as he had arrived, something changed. Back at the accident scene, 90 minutes had passed. Don's body still lay under the tarp. But another pastor, Dick Honorecker, who had been at the same conference, had stopped out of curiosity and was drawn to pray. He asked the officers if he could pray over the man in the crushed car. They said he's already gone, but Pastor Dick felt something stir in his spirit. He crawled into the wreckage, he touched Don's shoulder, and he began to sing. He sang an old hymn, "What a Friend We Have in Jesus." Then, something unbelievable happened. As he sang, Don Piper suddenly began to sing with him, alive, breathing, broken, but back. Paramedics rushed in, shocked. This man was dead, they said. There's no way. And yet there he was, alive. Don didn't wake up healed. He woke up shattered. His body was broken in over 40 places. He endured 34 major surgeries. Pain became a constant companion. There were nights he begged God to take him back. But God had a different plan. Over time, Don began to speak about his experience, not at first, not easily. For months, he kept it to himself. It was too sacred, too hard to explain, but eventually people needed to hear it. Churches, radio stations, TV programs. He was invited to speak, to testify, to describe what few have ever returned to tell. And when he did, something miraculous began to happen. People found hope. Grieving parents, cancer patients, soldiers, doubters, believers. They listened and they were comforted. Because Don's story wasn't just about heaven, it was about God's presence. Not just there, but here, now. So what does this all mean for you and me? Don Piper's story is not just a miracle for one man, it's a message for all of us. First, it reminds us that death is not the end. If heaven is real, and Don believes with all his heart that it is, then this life is only the beginning. Second, it shows that God's presence is near, even in suffering. Don didn't just meet God in heaven, he felt him in the hospital room, in the months of pain, in the prayers of friends. Third, it calls us to purpose. Don didn't want to return, but God brought him back with a mission to share hope, to comfort others, to live fully. And so we ask, what is your purpose? Why are you here today, alive, breathing, listening? You may not get 90 minutes in heaven, but you do have now. So, the next time you walk through a storm, the next time you wonder if God is listening, remember this story. Remember Don Piper, the man who died on a bridge and came back to tell the world that heaven is real, that God is near, and that love never dies. Want to read the full story? Check out Don Piper's book, 90 Minutes in Heaven. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs hope today. Subscribe, like, and comment below.